When you open Marvelous Designer, this is the first pop-up that you'll see the graphic options. I leave it at the defaults with Show Shadow and Use Shader turned on, and Anti-Aliasing set to X4. If you need higher anti-aliasing, you can always set it to a higher number, although I don't see any visible difference, even at 16 or 32. Then click OK and wait for it to finish loading. So the next pop-up you'll see is the avatar editor, where you can choose to use one of MD's default avatars, either man, woman, or child. And you can choose what hair you want and what kind of shoes you want them to wear too. In a later tutorial, I'll teach you how to bring in your own model, they call avatar, so that you can make clothes to fit any model you have, no matter how big he is or how many arms he has. To the right is the 2D pattern window. This is where you're going to be creating the pattern pieces that will make up your clothes. In the 3D garment window to the left, once you sync and simulate, we'll cover that shortly, you'll be able to see what your clothes look like on your model. Making clothes in Marvelous Designer is very similar to how seamstresses make clothes in real life. They draw out patterns and then they cut out pieces of fabric, sew it together, add elastic bands and all kinds of other tricks to make cool looking clothes. The great thing about creating clothes in Marvelous Designer is that you don't have to get it right the first time. You can keep on changing your clothes, pulling at them, stretching them, shrinking them, until you get them to be perfect looking like you want them to. And you can continuously look at what they look like on your model, while changing them in the 2D pattern window. It's very easy to make clothes in Marvelous Designer once you understand the basics, even without knowing how to sew. Now let's see how we can navigate around these two windows. If you have a normal mouse which has a middle wheel, then simply by holding down the middle wheel, you'll be able to pan around either one of the windows. To zoom in and out, simply roll your mouse wheel back and forth. And when you right-click here, you'll get a menu. When you right-click in the garment window or on a garment piece, you'll get different menus too. And if you hold down your right mouse button and drag, you'll be able to rotate around your model. Zoom and pan work the same like in the 2D pattern window. If you have an Apple mouse which doesn't have a mouse wheel or middle mouse button, then you can either download a free app called Magic Prefs, which enables you to assign a middle mouse button, although it's not always reliable and sometimes it doesn't work as expected. Or you can go into Settings, User Settings, and in View Controls, you can change it from middle mouse button to like left mouse button and Alt, or right mouse button and a modifier key. You can also change how the zoom, the rotate and the pan work here. Now whenever I'll be hovering over one of the buttons or tools, you'll see that I've assigned my own custom hotkeys to them, because I like them better than the default ones. You can change your hotkeys by going to Shortcuts, and then by clicking anywhere, and then typing in a key. Then to save it, just press Close. Now let's take a look at this button. It's called the Sync button, and when you open MD, it's turned off by default and is white. White means it's turned off. When you click it, it turns orange. In order for changes that you do to your patterns in the 2D pattern window to show on your model in the 3D garment window, you need to turn it on. Now any changes that you make to your patterns will display in your garment window. As you can see, we stretched it and the seams are now showing. However, what you see right now is not really what it will look like. Click that little white arrow up there, which is the Simulate button, in order to see what the cloth will really look like during simulation. Depending on how strong your computer is, simulation may go faster or it may be slower. Now with Sync and Simulate turned on at the same time, changes that you make to your pattern, excluding changing seams, which will turn off simulation, will now display in real time in your garment window, and you can pull at your cloth, you can drag at it, tug at it. With Sync turned off, any changes that you make to your patterns will not update until you turn Sync on again. I work with Sync turned on all the time. Now let's delete all of that, and I'll explain to you about this shadow. Whatever model you bring in, you'll see their shadow in the 2D pattern window. But if you change the pose of your model, there's a few ways to do that, I'll explain that later. I'll just quickly give her a pose here, it won't update in the 2D pattern window. The shadow is locked to the initial position of your model when it's brought in. So for example, for making gloves, you need to see the fingers, so this pose is not very useful. If you need to make gloves, for instance, you'd want to either import a model for rotated wrist or rotate your entire model in order to see your hand's shadow in the 2D pattern window. What you see behind the model is the grid. It's good to have a big grid when you're first drafting your patterns, but as you get more specific, you'll want to have a smaller grid in order to easily move the points to match. The way to change the grid is to right-click anywhere in the 2D pattern window and to click on 2D pattern window properties. Open the property editor, and we'll cover that more later, and click on Activate Grid. Then you can enter a size, like 5 or 2.5 or 1 or 3 or anything in between. 1 is only good when you're really zoomed in, otherwise you can't see it. I'll set it back to the default 10. So to keep this tutorial simple, I'm just going to be covering these first 8 tools here, and in the next tutorials I'll be explaining all the rest here. All these internal shapes, sewing, and texturing comes later on. So first of all, I'm going to show you how to create a pattern piece. To create pattern pieces, you'll be using one of these 3 gray shapes: the circle, the rectangular, or the polygon tool. What this one does is wherever you click, it puts a segment point, and like this you can create any shape you want, and when you click the first point, it closes it, and there you've got your shape. Alright, I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to use the rectangular to create the basic shape for a dress. When you click and drag, you can create your rectangular, and I'll try to make it symmetric on both sides. When you're creating shapes for your patterns, it's best to have them, show line length. It's best to have them a round number. Like 498.72 is not very useful when you want to divide it, to make sleeves, to make other things. It's best to have an even full closed number, like 903 is also not very good. So I'm going to switch to this tool. These 2 tools are for editing your pattern. The first one is the Edit Pattern, which allows you to edit individual segment points. These round dots are called segment points. Or lines. You can edit the lines, you can move them, transform them, or transform points. I'm going to undo that. The second tool is a Transform Pattern, which just lets you transform individual lines or the entire pattern. Like here's to rotate, top round thing here. You can rotate it, or you can scale it. And this in the middle is a pivot point, so if you move the pivot point to the top and then you scale or rotate, it will go from there. As you see, if we put it straight, you see it's all deformed because the pivot point isn't in the middle. It's in the middle again, and we stretch, it's going to be different. Alright, let's just delete that. So even if I try to be precise and drag the square out along the grid lines, hoping that I'll get a round number, even if I try really hard, you'll see it's just never a perfect round number. And even if I tried to transform it, even if I had a smaller grid, it's just very difficult and it's just never perfect round number. So I'll show you a faster way to do this. Using the rectangular tool, I click once and I get the Create Rectangle pop-up. I'm going to set the width to 400 and the height to 800. This is extremely useful and very easy by using this Create Rectangular pop-up to create your perfect sized pattern pieces with their line lengths being a perfect round number. One thing that's very important, if you look here in the 3D garment window at this pattern piece, you'll see that it has a lighter and a darker side. Now this is not the lighting in the scene that's doing it. All the pattern pieces in Marvelous Designer are like clothing, like fabric pieces in the real world, where they have an outside side and an inside side. The inside side is always darker and the outside side is always lighter. If you look at your own clothes and turn them inside out, you'll see that the inside is different. The pattern, the fabric, the way it's sewn, the seams, the texture of the fabric, everything is the inside of it. So if you want your clothes to work like you want them to look like you want them to, and to behave well when you sew them together and not to tear themselves up and go in circles, then you need to keep the outside side out, which is the lighter side, and the inside side in. So when you make clothes, make sure that the lighter side, and it might be a different color if you assign a different color to your pattern, but there'll always be a lighter side. So make sure that the lighter side is always pointing outwards and the darker side pointing inwards.